Several people are missing on New Zealand's North Island after a landslide hit a campground at Mount Maunganui.
Mount Maunganui is supposed to be paradise, a world-famous tourist hotspot on New Zealand's coast, known for golden beaches, hiking trails, lush green hills, and peaceful holiday campgrounds filled with families, travelers, and outdoor explorers escaping into nature. It is the kind of place people associate with safety, beauty, and calm. But this week, paradise turned into tragedy. In the tourist destination of Mount Maunganui, a deadly landslide struck a popular beachside holiday park, killing 6 people after part of the slope above the site collapsed and buried the campground area. A place meant for rest and recreation became a disaster zone in moments. One night, tents and cabins stood quietly beneath the hillside. Then, without anyone being able to stop it, earth, mud, rocks, and debris came crashing down. And within hours, Mount Maunganui was no longer just a holiday destination. It was the center of one of New Zealand's most heartbreaking natural disasters in years. Rescue crews arrived quickly. Emergency operations began almost immediately. Search teams moved into unstable terrain, racing against time, but also against the terrifying reality that the hillside was still dangerous. Authorities warned that the area remained unsafe, and rescue work was hampered by the continuing risk of further collapse. Eventually, officials confirmed the worst. All 6 victims had been identified. The tragedy was complete, and it left the country asking an unavoidable question. How could something like this happen in one of New Zealand's most beloved tourist locations? Why do slopes fail so suddenly? And could disasters like this become more common as extreme weather events grow more intense? To understand why this landslide was so deadly, you first have to understand what landslides really are. Many people picture a landslide as slow mud creeping down a hill, something gradual and predictable. But deadly slope failures are rarely slow. They can happen with shocking speed. They behave more like sudden avalanches of earth than like ordinary erosion. Mud, saturated soil, fractured rock, uprooted trees, and debris can surge downslope with enormous destructive force. And in an outdoor setting like a campsite or holiday park, vulnerability is extreme. There are no reinforced walls, no underground shelters, no protection against moving earth. At night, people may have little time to process what is happening. That is why landslides remain one of the most frightening hazards on Earth. Not because they are loud, but because they can be silent until the moment they strike. And what happened at Mount Maunganui is not just a random accident. It is geology in motion. It is the result of terrain, water, gravity, and the deep structure of New Zealand itself. Because New Zealand is not sitting on stable ground. It sits on one of the most active tectonic boundaries on the planet, the collision zone between the Pacific Plate and the Australian Plate. These plates grind together, collide, and tear past one another, constantly reshaping the land. This movement generates earthquakes, fractures the crust, fuels volcanic systems, and forces mountains upward. New Zealand's landscape is young and steep. Its mountains are sharp, rugged, and still rising today. That matters because young mountains are unstable mountains. They have not eroded into gentle rolling hills over tens of millions of years. Instead, they form steep slopes that exist in constant tension. New Zealand is locked in a geological tug-of-war. Tectonic forces push land upward, while gravity relentlessly pulls it back down. Landslides are the inevitable release of that tension. In many ways, New Zealand is one of the most landslide-prone countries on Earth. The slopes are steep, the terrain is fractured, the land is dynamic, and all it takes is the right trigger. That trigger most often is water. A hillside is not a solid slab of concrete. It is a complex mixture of soil, clay, loose sediment, fractured rock, roots, and moisture. Most slopes remain stable because of friction. Soil grains press against one another. Vegetation binds the ground. The hillside holds together because its internal strength resists gravity's pull. But when heavy rainfall saturates the slope, the entire balance can change. Water infiltrates the ground, seeping downward into pores and fractures. At first, nothing seems different. The hillside looks unchanged, but underground, pressure begins building. Geologists call this pore water pressure. As water fills the tiny spaces inside the soil, the particles lose friction. The ground becomes weaker, less able to resist gravity. The hillside begins behaving less like solid earth and more like unstable slurry. And once the slope crosses a certain threshold, failure becomes almost inevitable. A section of hillside breaks loose. The earth begins moving, and gravity takes over completely. This is why landslides are so terrifying. The slope may appear normal until the exact second it collapses. And at Mount Maunganui, authorities confirmed that heavy rainfall was a major factor in destabilizing the terrain. The disaster occurred after intense weather saturated the slope, making conditions dangerous enough that rescue crews had to constantly worry about additional slips. But here is where this story expands beyond one tragedy. Because scientists have long warned about what happens when extreme rainfall meets steep terrain. While no single landslide can be immediately and directly attributed to climate change alone, researchers around the world have warned that heavier rainfall events could increase landslide risk in the future. Warmer air holds more moisture. Storms can release more water in shorter periods. And when rain falls faster than the land can absorb or drain, saturation becomes more likely. That is the mechanism that turns unstable slopes into deadly collapse zones. So the Mount Maunganui disaster is not necessarily a sign of one simple cause. It is the intersection of geology and weather. It is steep land, fragile earth, and extreme water loading. It is gravity waiting for the moment when the hillside can no longer hold. And landslides do not end when the slope collapses. They often trigger secondary dangers. When debris blocks streams or rivers, it can form temporary natural dams. Water builds behind them. Pressure rises, and if those dams fail, flash floods can surge downstream. Landslides can also isolate communities, destroy roads, sever evacuation routes, and cut off emergency access. They are not just disasters, they are landscape transformations that can reshape valleys in hours. That is why New Zealand treats landslides as a serious national hazard. Not necessarily the only hazard, but one of the most dangerous and unpredictable. Unlike earthquakes, which strike suddenly but end quickly, landslide risk can remain for days or weeks after heavy rain. Slopes may stay unstable long after storms pass. And this is what makes them so difficult. The danger is not always over when the weather clears. So what can be done? The uncomfortable truth is that New Zealand cannot eliminate landslides entirely. The terrain is too steep. The geology is too active. But risk can be reduced. Experts recommend rainfall threshold warning systems, real-time slope monitoring, hazard zoning around unstable hillsides, and careful planning about where campsites and holiday parks are placed. Vegetation matters enormously as well. Trees stabilize slopes, roots bind soil together. When forests are removed, hillsides become dramatically more vulnerable. Reforestation can reduce risk, while deforestation increases it. But Mount Maunganui's tragedy also carries a global warning, because this is not only a New Zealand issue. Similar slope failures have occurred across Italy, Japan, Indonesia, California, the Philippines, and the Himalayas. Wherever steep terrain meets intense rainfall, the ground can fail. And as extreme weather becomes a greater challenge worldwide, scientists continue to stress the importance of understanding these hazards before tragedy strikes. 6 people lost their lives at Mount Maunganui because the hillside above them could no longer hold. A reminder that the ground beneath us is not permanent. This disaster is more than breaking news. It is geology in motion. It is weather meeting tectonics. And it is a warning that in some of the world's most beautiful places, the land itself can become one of nature's most unpredictable dangers. If you want more real-time geology updates from around the world, make sure to subscribe and comment below. Do you think landslide risk will become one of the defining challenges of the future? Because the Earth is not just shaking anymore. In places like Mount Maunganui, it is collapsing.